time for more reading. Sorry, finishing up catching something on Pokemon Go. Hup! We're getting close. Alright. The new death straightened up. Or, Bildor stepped back, turned around, and ran for it. So let me turn this a little. It was, as he was wonderfully well placed to know, merely putting off the inevitable. But it wasn't that what living was all about. No one had ever run away from him after they were dead. Many had tried it before they were dead, often with great ingenuity. But the normal reaction of a spirit suddenly pitched from one world into the next was to hang around hopefully. Why run, after all? It wasn't as if you knew where you were running to. The ghost of Bildor knew where he was running to. Ned Simnel's smithy was locked up for the night, although this did not present a problem. Not alive and not dead, the spirit of Bildor lived through the wall. The fire was barely visible. It was a barely visible glow settling in the forge. The smithy was full of warm darkness. What it didn't contain was the ghost of a scythe. Bildor looked around desperately. Squeak. There was a small, dark-robed figure sitting on a beam above him. It gestured frantically towards the corner. He saw a dark handle sticking out from a load of timber. He tried to pull at it with his fingers, now as substantial as a shadow. He said he would destroy it for me. The Death of Rat shrugged sympathetically. The new death stepped through the wall, scythe held in both hands. It advanced on Bildor. There was a rustling. The gray robes were pouring into the smithy. Bildor grinned in terror. The new death stopped, posing dramatically in the glow from the forge. It swung. It almost lost its balance. You're not supposed to duck! Bildor dived through the wall again and pounded across the square, skull down, spectral feet making no noise on the cobbles. He reached the little group by the clock. On the horse! Go! Oh, what's happening? What's happening? It hasn't worked. Miss Flitworth gave him a panicky look, but put the unconscious child on Binky's back and climbed up after her. Then Bildor brought his hand down hard on the horse's flank. There, at least, there was contact. Binky existed in all worlds. Go! He didn't look around, but darted up the road toward the farm. A weapon, something he could hold. The only weapon in the undead world was the hands of the new death. As Bildor ran, he was aware of a faint, higher-pitched clicking noise. He looked down. The Death of Rats was keeping pace with him. It gave him an encouraging squeak. He skidded through the farm gate and flung himself against the wall. There was the distant rumble of the storm. Apart from that, silence. He relaxed slightly and crept cautiously along the wall towards the back of the farmhouse. He caught a glimpse of something metallic. Leaning against the wall there, where the men from the village had left it when they brought him back, was his scythe. Not the one he'd carefully prepared, but the one he'd used for harvest. What edge it had been achieved only by the whetstone and the caress of the stalks. It was a familiar shape, and he made a tentative grab at it. His hand passed right through. The further you run, the closer you get. The new death stepped unhurriedly out of the shadows. You should know that, it added. Bildor straightened up. We will enjoy this. Enjoy? The new death advanced. Bildor backed away. Yes, the taking of one death is the same as achieving the end of a billion lesser lives. Lesser lives? This is not a game. The new death hesitated. What is a game? Bildor felt a tiny flicker of hope. I could show you. The end of the scythe handle caught him under the chin and knocked him against the wall, where he slid to the ground. We detect a trick. We do not listen. The reaper does not listen to the harvest. Bildor tried to get up. The scythe handle struck him again. We will not make the same mistakes. Bildor looked up. The new death was holding the golden timer. The top bulb was empty. Around both of them, the landscape shifted, reddened, began to take the unreal appearance of reality seen from the other side. You're out of time, Mr. Bildor. The new death raised his cowl. There was no face there. There was not even a skull. Smoke curled formlessly between the robe and a golden crown. Bildor raised himself on his elbows. A crown? His voice shook with rage. I never wore a crown. You never wanted to rule. The death swung the scythe back, and then it dawned on the old death that this new death, and the new death that the hissing of passing time had not in fact stopped. The new death hesitated and took out the golden glass. It shook it. Bildor looked into the empty face under the crown. There was an expression of puzzlement there, even with no features actually to wear it. The expression hung in the air by itself. He saw the crown turn. Miss Flitworth stood with her hands held a foot apart and her eyes closed. Between her hands, in the air in front of her, hovered the faint outline of a lifetimer, its sand pouring away in a torrent. The deaths could make out, on the glass, the spidery name, Renata Flitworth. The new death's featureless expression became one of terminal puzzlement. It turned to Bildor. For you? But Bildor was already rising and unfolding like the wrath of kings. He reached behind him, growling, living on loan time, and his hands closed around the harvest scythe. The crowned death saw it coming and raised its own weapon, but there was very possibly nothing in the world that would stop the worn blade as it snarled through the air, rage and vengeance giving it an edge beyond any definition of sharpness. It passed through the metal without slowing. No crown, said Bildor, looking directly into the smoke. No crown, only the harvest. The robe folded up around his blade. There was the thin wail rising beyond the peak of hearing. A black column, like the negative of lightning, flashed up from the ground and disappeared into the clouds. Death waited for a moment, and then gingerly gave the robe a prod with his foot. The crown, bent slightly out of shape, rolled out of it a little way before evaporating. Oh, he said dismissively. Drama. He walked over to Miss Flitworth and gently pressed her hands together. The image of the lifetimer disappeared. The blue and violet fog on the edge of sight faded as solid reality flowed back. Down in the town, the clock finished striking midnight. The old woman was shivering. Death snapped his fingers in front of her eyes. Miss Flitworth? Renata? I didn't know what to do, and you said it wasn't difficult, and... Death walked into the barn. When he came out, he was wearing his black robe. She was still standing there. I didn't know what to do, she repeated, possibly not to him. What happened? Is it all over? Death looked around. The gray shapes were pouring into the yard. Possibly not, he said. More trolleys appeared behind the row of soldiers. They looked like small silvery workers with the occasional pale golden gleam of a warrior. We should retreat back to the stairs, said Doreen. I think that's where they want us to go, said Wendell. That's fine by me. Anyway, I wouldn't think those wheels could manage steps, could they? And you can't exactly fight to the death, said Ludmilla. Lupine was keeping close to her, yellow eyes fixed on the slowly advancing wheels. Chance would be a fine thing, said Wendell. They reached the moving stairs. He looked up. Trolleys clustered around the top of the upward stair, but perhaps the way to the floor below was clear. Perhaps we could find another way up, said Ludmilla hopefully. They shuffled onto the moving stair. Behind them, the trolleys moved in to block their return. The wizards were on the floor below. They were standing so still among the potted plants and fountains that Wendell passed them at first, assuming that they were some sort of statue or piece of esoteric furniture. The Arch-Chancellor had a false red nose and was holding some balloons. Beside him, the bursar was juggling colored balls, but like a machine, his eyes staring blankly at nothing. The senior wrangler was standing a ways off wearing a pair of sandwich boards. The writing on them hadn't fully ripened yet, but Wendell would bet his afterlife that it would eventually say something like, Sail! The other wizards were clustered around together, like dolls whose clockwork hadn't been wound up. Each one had a large oblong badge on his robe. The familiar organic-looking writing was growing into a word that looked like security. Although why it was doing so was a complete mystery. The wizard certainly didn't look very secure. Wendell snapped his fingers in front of the dean's pale eyes. There was no response. He's not dead, said Reg. Just resting, said Wendell. Switched off. Reg gave the Dean a push. The wizard tottered forward, then staggered to a precarious, swaying halt. Well, we'll never get them out, said Arthur. Not like that. Can't you wake them up? Light a feather under their nose, Doreen volunteered. I don't think that'll work, said Wendell. He based on the statement of the fact that Red's shoe is very nearly under their noses, and anyone whose nasal equipment failed to register Mr. Shoe would certainly not react to a mere burning feather, or a heavy weight dropped from a great height, if it came to that. Mr. Poons, said Ludmilla. I used to know a golem who looked like him, said Red Shoe. Just like him. Great big chap, made out of clay. That's what your typical golem basically is. You just have to write a special holy word on him to start him up. What, like security? Could be. Wendell peered at the Dean. No, he said at last, no one's got that much clay. He looked around them. Gotta find out where this blasted music's coming from. Where the musicians are hidden, you mean? I don't think they're musicians. You gotta have musicians, brother, said Reg. That's why it's called music. Firstly, this isn't like any music I've heard. And secondly, I always thought you'd have to have oil lamps or candles to make light. There aren't any, and there's still lights shining everywhere, said Wendell. Mr. Poon, said Ludmilla again, prodding him. Yes. Here come some trolleys again. They were blocking all 5 passages leading off the central space. There's no stairs down, said Wendell. Maybe it's cheese in one of the glassy bits, said Ludmilla. The shops? I don't think so. They don't look finished. Anyway, that feels wrong. Lupine growled. Spikes glistened on the leading trolleys, but they weren't rushing to attack. They must have seen what we did to the others, said Arthur. Yes, but how could they? That was upstairs, said Wendell. Well, maybe they can talk to each other. How can they talk? How can they think? There can't be any brains in that lot of wire, said Ludmilla. Ants and bees don't think when it comes to that, said Wendell. They're just controlled. He looked up. They looked upward. It's coming from somewhere in the ceiling, he said. We've got to find it right now. There's just panels of light, said Ludmilla. Something else. Look for something. It could be coming from. It's coming from everywhere. Whatever you're thinking of doing, said Doreen, picking up a potted plant and holding it like a club. I hope you do it fast. What's that black thing up there, said Arthur. Where? There, Arthur pointed. Okay, Reg and me will help you up. Come on. Me, but I can't stand heights. I thought you could turn into a bat. Yes, but a very nervous one. Stop complaining. Right. 1 foot here, now your hand here. Now put your foot on Reg's shoulder. And don't go through, said Reg. I don't like this, Arthur moaned as they hoisted him up. Doreen stopped glaring at the creepy trolleys. Arthur, noblesse oblige. What? Is that some kind of vampire code? Reg whispered. It means something like a count's gotta do what a count's gotta do, said Wendell. Count! Snarled Arthur, swaying dangerously. I never should have listened to that lawyer. I should have known nothing ever good had come in a long brown envelope. And I can't reach the bloody thing anyway. Can't you jump? Said Wendell. Can't you drop dead? No. And I'm not jumping. Fly, then. Turn into a bat and fly. I can't get the airspeed. You could throw him up, said Ludmilla. You know, like a paper dart. Blow that! I'm a count! You just said you didn't want to be, said Wendell mildly. On the ground I don't want to be. When it comes to be chucked around like a frisbee. Arthur, do what Mr. Poon says. I don't see why. Arthur as a bat was surprisingly heavy. Wendell held him by the ears like a misshapen bowling ball and tried to take aim. Remember, I'm an endangered species, the Count squeaked as Wendell brought his arm back. It was an accurate throw. Arthur fluttered to the disc in the ceiling and gripped it with his claws. Can you move it? No! Then hang on tight and change back. No! We'll catch you. No! Arthur! Screamed Doreen, prodding an advancing trolley with her makeshift club. Oh, all right. There was a momentary vision of Arthur Vinkings clinging desperately to the ceiling, and then he dropped on Wendell and Reg, the disc clasped to his chest. The music stopped abruptly. Pink tubing poured out of the ravaged hole above them and coiled upon Arthur, making him look like a very cheap plate of spaghetti and meatballs. The fountain seemed to operate in reverse for a moment, and then dried up. The trolleys halted. The ones at the back ran into the ones at the front, and there was a chorus of pathetic clanking noises. Tubing still poured out of the hole. Wendell picked up a bit. It was an unpleasant pink and sticky. What do you think it is? I think, said Wendell, that we'd better get out of here now. The floor trembled. Steam gushed from the fountain, if not sooner. There was a groan from the Arch-Chancellor. The Dean slumped forward. The other wizards remained upright, but only just. They're coming out of it, said Ludmilla, but I don't think they'll manage the stairs. I don't think anyone should even think about trying to manage the stairs, said Wendell. Look at them. The moving stairs weren't. The black steps glistened in the shadowless light. I see what you mean, said Ludmilla. I'd rather try and walk on quicksand. It'd probably be safer, said Wendell. Maybe there's a ramp? There must be some way for the trolleys to get around. Good idea. Ludmilla eyed the trolleys. They were milling around aimlessly. I think I might even have a better one, she said, grabbing a passing handle. The trolley fought for a moment and then, lacking any contrary instructions, settled down docilely. The ones that can't walk will walk, and the ones that can't walk get pushed. Come on, Granddad. This was to the bursar, who was persuaded to flop across the trolley. He said yo faintly and shut his eyes again. The Dean was manhandled on top of him. And here's the footnote. It is traditional, when loading wire trolleys, to put the most fragile items at the bottom. Poor bursar. And now where? Said Doreen. A couple of the floor tiles buckled upward. A heavy gray vapor started to pour out. It must be somewhere at the end of the passageway, said Ludmilla. Come on. Arthur looked down at the mists coiling around his feet. I wonder how you can do that, he said. It's amazingly difficult to get stuff that does that. We tried it, to make our crypt more cryptic, but it just smokes up the place and sets fire to the curtains. Come on, Arthur, we are going. You don't think we did too much damage, do you? Perhaps we should leave a note. Yeah, I could write something on the wall if you like, said Reg. He picked up a struggling worker trolley by its handle end with some satisfaction, smashed it against a pillar until all its wheels fell off. Wendell watched the Fresh Start Club head up the nearest passage, pushing a bargain assortment of wizardry. Well, he said. As simple as that. That's all we have to do. Hardly any drama at all. He went to move forward and stopped. Pink tubes were forcing their way around the floor, and were already coiled tightly around his legs. More floor tiles leapt into the air. The stairway shattered, revealing the dark, serrated, and above all, living tissue that had powered them. The walls pulsed and caved inward, the marble cracking to reveal purple and pinkness underneath. Of course, thought a tiny, calm part of Wendell's mind, none of this is really real. Buildings aren't really alive, it's just a metaphor, only at the moment metaphors are like candles in a firework factory. That being said, what sort of creature is the queen? Like a queen bee, except she's also the hive. Like a caddisfly, which builds, if I'm not mistaken, a shell out of bits of stone and things to camouflage itself. Or like a nautilus, which adds onto its shell as it gets bigger. And very much, to judge by the way the floors are ripping up, like a very angry starfish. I wonder how cities would defend themselves against this sort of thing. Creatures generally evolve some sort of defense against predators, poisons and stings and spikes and things. Here and now, that's probably me. Spiky old Wendell Poons. At least I can try to see to it that the others get out all right. Let's make my presence felt. He reached down, grubbed a double handful of pulsating tubes, and heaved. The queen's screech of rage was heard all the way to the university. The storm clouds sped towards the hill. They piled up in a towering mass, very fast. Lightning flashed, somewhere in the core. There's too much life around, said Death. Not that I'm one to complain. Where's the child? I put her to bed. She's sleeping now. Just ordinary sleep. Lightning struck on the hill like a thunderbolt. It was followed by a clanking, grinding noise somewhere in the middle distance. Death sighed. More drama. He walked around the barn so that he could command a good view of the dark fields. Miss Flitworth followed very closely on his heels, using him as a shield against whatever terrors were out there. A blue glow crackled behind a distant hedge. It was moving. What is it? It was the combination harvester. Was? What is it now? Death glanced over at the clustering watchers. A poor loser. The harvester tore across the soaking fields, cloth arms whirring, levers moving inside an electric blue nimbus. The shafts for the horse waved uselessly in the air. How could it go without a horse? It had a horse yesterday. It doesn't need one. He looked around at the Grey Watchers. There were ranks of them now. Binky's still in the yard. Come on. No. The combination harvester accelerated towards them. The ship of its blades became a whine. Is it angry because you stole its tarpaulin? That's not all I stole. Death grinned at the Watchers. He picked up his scythe, turned it over in his hands, and then, when he was sure their gaze was fixed on it, let it fall to the ground. Then he folded his arms again. Miss Flitworth dragged at him. What do you think you're doing? Drama. The harvester reached the gate into the yard and came through in a cloud of sawdust. Are you sure we'll be all right? Death nodded. Well, that's all right then. The harvester's wheels were a blur. Probably. And then something in the machinery went clonk. Then the harvester was still traveling, but in pieces. Sparks fountained up from its axles. A few spindles and arms managed to hold together, jerking madly as they spun away from the whirling, slowing confusion. The circle of blades tore free, smashed up through the machine, and skimmed away across the fields. There was a jangle, a clatter, and then a last isolated boing, which is the audible equivalent of the famous pair of smoking boots. And then there was silence. Death reached down calmly and picked up a complicated-looking spindle as it pinwheeled toward his feet. It had been bent into a right angle. Miss Flitworth peered around him. What happened? I think the elliptical cam has gradually slid up the beam shaft and caught on the flange rebate, with disastrous results. Death stared defiantly at the Grey Watchers. One by one, they began to disappear. He picked up the scythe. And now I must go, he said. Miss Flitworth looked horrified. What, just like that? Yes, exactly like that. I have a lot of work to do. And I won't see you again. I mean... Oh, yes, soon. He sought for the right words and gave up. That's a promise. Death pulled up his robe and reached into the pocket of his Bildor overall, which he was still wearing underneath. When Mr. Simnel comes to collect the bits in the morning, he will probably be looking for this, he said, and dropped something small and beveled into her hand. What is it? A 3/8 Gripply. Death walked over to his horse and then remembered something. And he owes me a farthing, too. Ridcully opened one eye. People were milling around. There were lights and excitement. Lots of people were talking at once. He seemed to be sitting in a very uncomfortable pram with some strange insects buzzing around him. He could hear the dean complaining, and there were groans that could only be coming from the bursar and the voice of a young woman. People were being ministered to, but no one was paying him any attention. Well, if there was ministering going on, he was damn well gonna get ministered as well. He coughed loudly. You could try, he said, to the cruel world in general, forcing some brandy between my lips. An apparition appeared above him holding a lamp over its head. It was a size 5 face and a size 13 skin, and it said, Ook, in a concerned way. Oh, it's you, said Ridcully. He tried to sit up quickly, just in case the librarian tried to the kiss of life. Confused memories wobbled across his brain. He could remember a wall of clanking metal, and then pinkness, and then music. Endless music, designed to turn the living brain into cream cheese. He turned around. There was a building behind him, surrounded by crowds of people. It was squat and clung to the ground in a strangely animal way, as if it might be possible to lift up a wing of the building and hear the pop-pop-pop of suckers letting go. Light streamed out of it, and steam curled out of its doors. Ridcully's woken up! More faces appeared. Ridcully thought, oh, it's not Soul Cake night, so they're not wearing masks. Oh, blast. Behind them he heard the dean say, I vote we work up her petty seismic reorganizer and lob it through the door. No more problems. Oh, we're too close to the city walls. We just need to drop Quantum's attractive point in the right place. Or Sup Jumper's incendiary surprise, perhaps. This was the Bursar's voice. Burn it out, it's the best way. Yeah, and what do you know about military tactics? You can't even say yo properly. Ridcully gripped the sides of the trolley. Oh, would anyone mind telling me, he said, what the heck is going on? Ludmilla pushed her way through the members of the Fresh Start Club. You've got to stop them, Arch-Chancellor, she said. They're talking about destroying the big shop. More nasty recollections settled on Ridcully's mind. Good idea, he said. But Mr. Poons is still in there. Ridcully tried to focus on the glowing building. What? Dead Wendell Poons? Arthur flew back when we realized he wasn't with us, and he said Wendell was fighting something that had come out of the walls. We saw lots of trolleys, but they weren't bothered about us. He let us get out. What, dead Wendell Poons? You can't magic the place to bits with one of your wizards in there. What, dead Wendell Poons? Yes, but he's dead, said Ridcully. Isn't he? He said he was. Ha! Said someone who had much less skin than Ridcully would have liked him to have. That's typical. That's naked vitalism, that is. I bet they'd rescue someone in there if they happened to be alive. But he wasn't keen on, Ridcully hazarded. A lot of this was beyond him, but people like Ridcully didn't matter for very long. To people like Ridcully, this didn't matter for very long. Ridcully was very simple-minded. This doesn't mean stupid. It's just that he could only think properly about things if he cut away all the complicated bits around the edges. He concentrated on a single main fact. Someone who was technically a wizard was in trouble. He could relate to that. It struck a chord. The whole dead or alive business could wait. There was another minor point that nagged at him, though. Arthur, flew? Hello. Ridcully turned his head. He blinked slowly. Nice teeth you got there, he said. Thank you, said Arthur Winkings. All your own, are they? Oh, yes. Amazing. Of course, I expect you brush regularly. Yes? Hygienic, that's the important thing. So what are you going to do? Said Ludmilla. Well, we'll just go and fetch him out, said Ridcully. What was it about the girl? He felt a strange urge to pat her on the head. We'll get some magic and get him out. Yes, Dean! Yo! We're just gonna go in there and get Wendell out. Yo! What? Said the senior wrangler. You must be out of your mind. Ridcully tried to look as dignified as possible given his situation. Remember that I am your Arch-Chancellor, he snapped. Then you must be out of your mind, Arch-Chancellor, said senior wrangler. He lowered his voice. Anyway, he's undead. I don't see how you can save undeads. It's kind of a contradiction in terms. I dichotomy, said the Bursar helpfully. I don't think surgery is involved. Anyway, didn't we bury him, said the lecturer in recent runes. And now we dig him up again, said the Arch-Chancellor. It's probably a miracle of existence. Like pickles, said the Bursar happily. Even the fresh starters went blank. They do that in parts of Hondawaland, said the Bursar. They make these big jars of special pickles, and they bury them in the ground for months to ferment, and they get these lovely, piquant... Tell me, Ludmilla whispered to Ridcully, is this how wizards usually behave? The senior wrangler is an amazingly fine example, said Ridcully. Got the same urgent grasp of reality as a cardboard cutout. Proud to have him on the team. He rubbed his hands together. Okay, lads. Volunteers? Yo, Hut, said the dean, who was in an entirely different world now. I would be remiss in my duty if I failed to help a brother, said Red Shoe. Ook! You? We can't take you, said the dean, glaring at the librarian. You don't know a thing about guerrilla warfare. Ook! Said the librarian, and made a surprisingly comprehensive gesture to indicate, on the other hand, what he didn't know about orangutan warfare could be written on a very small pounded-up remains of, for example, the dean. 4 of us should be enough, said the Arch-Chancellor. Never even heard him say yo, muttered the dean. He removed his hat, something a wizard doesn't ordinarily do unless he's about to pull something out of it, and handed it to the Bursar. Then he tore a thin strip off the bottom of his robe, held it dramatically in both hands, and tied it around his forehead. It's part of the ethos, he said, in answer to their penetratingly unspoken questions. That's what the warriors on the counterweight continent do before they go into battle. You have to shout. He tried to remember some far-off reading. Bonsai! Yes! Bonsai! I thought it meant chopping bits off trees to make them small, said the senior wrangler. The dean hesitated. He wasn't too sure himself, if it came to it, but a good wizard never let uncertainty stand in the way. No, it's definitely gotta be bonsai, he said. He considered it some more and then brightened up. On account of it all being part of a bushido, like small trees. Bush-e-do. Yeah, makes sense when you think about it. But you can't shout bonsai here, said the lecturer of recent runes. You got a totally different cultural background. It'd be useless. No one will know what you mean. I'll work on it, said the dean. He noticed Ludmilla standing with her mouth open. This is wizard talk, he said. It is, isn't it, said Ludmilla. I never would have guessed. The Arch-Chancellor had got out of the trolley and was wheeling it experimentally back and forth. It usually took quite a long time for a fresh idea to fully lodge in Riddicully's mind, but he felt instinctively that there were all sorts of uses for a wire basket on 4 wheels. Are we going or are we just standing around all night bandaging our heads, he said. Yo, snapped the dean. Yo, said Red Shoe. Ook! Was that a yo, said the dean suspiciously. Ook. Well, all right then. Death sat on a mountaintop. It wasn't a particularly high or bare or sinister. No witches held naked sabbats on it. Discworld witches, on the whole, didn't hold with taking off any more clothes than was absolutely necessary for the business in hand. No specters haunted it. No naked little men sat on the summit dispensing wisdom, because the first thing that the truly wise man works out is that sitting around on the mountaintop gives you not only hemorrhoids, but frostbitten hemorrhoids. Occasionally, people would climb the mountain, add a stone or two to cairn on top, if only to prove that there is nothing really damn stupid that humans won't do. Death sat on the cairn and ran a stone down along the blade of his scythe in long, deliberate strokes. There was a movement of air. 3 gray servants popped into existence. One said, "You think you have won?" One said, "You think you have triumphed?" Death turned the stone in his hands to get a fresh surface, brought it slowly down the length of the blade. One said, "We will inform Azrael." One said, "You are only, after all, a little Death." Death held the blade up to the moonlight, twisting it this way and that, noting the play of light on the tiny flecks of metal on its edge. Then he stood up, in one quick movement. The servants backed away hurriedly. He reached out with the speed of a snake and grasped a robe, pulling its empty hood level with his eye sockets. "Do you know why the prisoner in the tower watches the flight of birds?" he said. It said, "Take your hands off me." Oops. Blue flame flared for a moment. Death lowered his hand and looked around at the other 2. One said, "You haven't heard the last of this." They vanished. Death brushed a speck of ash off his robe and then planted his feet squarely on the mountaintop. He raised the scythe over his head in both hands and summoned up all the lesser deaths that had arisen in his absence. After a while, they streamed up the mountain in a faint black wave. They flowed together like dark mercury. It went on for a long time and then stopped. Death lowered the scythe, then examined himself. Yes, all there. Once again, he was the Death, containing all the deaths of the world, except for a moment he hesitated. There was one tiny area of emptiness somewhere, some fragment of his soul, something unaccounted for. He couldn't be quite certain what it was. He shrugged. Doubtless he'd find out. In the meantime, there was a lot of work to be done. He rode away. Far off, in his den under the barn, the Death of Rats relaxed his determined grip on a beam. Windle Poons brought both feet down heavily on a tentacle snaking out from under the tiles and lurched off through the steam. A slab of marble smashed down, showering him with fragments. Then he kicked the wall, savagely. There's probably no way out now, he realized. Even if there was, he couldn't find it. Anyway, he was already inside the thing. It was shaking its own walls down in an effort to get at him. At least he could give it a really bad case of indigestion. He headed toward an orifice that had once been the entrance to a wide passage and dived awkwardly through it before it snapped shut. Silver fire crackled over the walls. There was so much life here it couldn't be contained. There were a few trolleys still here, skittering madly across the shaking floor, as lost as Wendell. He set off along another likely-looking corridor, although most corridors he'd been down in the last 130 years hadn't pulsated and dripped so much. Another tentacle thrust through the wall and tripped him up. Of course, it couldn't kill him, but it could make him bodiless. Like old one-man Bucket, a fate worse than death, probably. He pulled himself up. The ceiling bounced down on him, flattening him against the floor. He counted under his breath and scampered forward. Steam washed over him. He slipped again and thrust out his hands. He could feel himself losing control. There were too many things to operate. Never mind the spleen. Just keeping the heart and lungs going is taking too much effort. Topiary! What the heck do you mean? Topiary! Get it? Yo? Ook! Wendell looked up through foggy eyes. Obviously he was losing control of his brain, too. A trolley came sideways out of the steam with shadowy figures clinging onto the sides. One hairy arm and one arm that was barely an arm anymore reached down, picked him up bodily, and dumped him to the basket. 4 tiny wheels skidded on the floor, and the trolley bounced off the wall, then righted itself and rattled away. Wendell was only vaguely aware of the voices. Off you go, Dean. I know you've been looking forward to it. That was the Arch-Chancellor. Yo! You'll kill it totally. I don't think I want it ending up at the Fresh Start Club. I don't think it's a joiner. That was Red Shoe. Ook! That was the librarian. Don't you worry, Wendell. The Dean is going to do something military, apparently, said Ridcully. Yo! Hot! Oh, good grief. Wendell saw the Dean's hand float past with something glittering in it. What are you going to use? Said Ridcully as the trolley rocketed through the steam. The seismic reorganizer, the attractive point, or the incendiary surprise? Yo! Said the Dean with satisfaction. What? All 3 at once? Yo! That's going a bit far, is it? And incidentally, if you say yo one more time, Dean, I will personally have you thrown out of the university, pursued to the rim of the world by the finest demons that thaumaturgy can conjure up, torn into extremely small pieces, minced, turned into a mixture reminiscent of steak tartare, and turned out into a dog bowl. Yep. The Dean caught Ridcully's eyes. Yes? Oh, go on, Arch-Chancellor. What's the good of having mastery over cosmic balance and knowing the secret of fate? You can't blow something up. Please, I've got them all ready. You know how it upsets the inventory if you don't use them after you've got them ready. The trolley whirred up the trembling slope and cornered on 2 wheels. Oh, all right, said Ridcully. If it means that much to you. Sorry. The Dean started to mutter urgently under his breath, then screamed, I've gone blind! Your bonsai bandage has slipped over your eyes, Dean. Wendell groaned. How are you feeling, Brother Poons? Regis' ravaged features occluded Wendell's view. Oh, you know, said Wendell. Could be better, could be worse. The trolley ricocheted off a wall and jerked away in another direction. How are those spells coming along, Dean? Said Ridcully through gritted teeth. I'm having real difficulties controlling this thing. The Dean muttered a few more words and then waved his hands dramatically. Octarine flame spurted from his fingertips and earthed itself somewhere in the mists. Yee-haw! He crowed. Dean? Yes, Arch-Chancellor? The comment I made recently about the Y word. Yes? You can definitely include yee-haw, too. The Dean hung his head. Oh, yes, Chancellor. And why hasn't everything gone boom? I put a slight delay on it, Arch-Chancellor. I thought perhaps we ought to get out before things happened. Good thinking, that man. Soon have you out, Wendell, said Red Shoe. We don't leave our people behind. Isn't this? And the floor erupted ahead of them, and then behind them. The thing that arose from the shattered tiles was either formless or many forms at once. It writhed angrily, snapping its tubes at them. The trolley skewed to a halt. Got any more magic, Dean? No, Arch-Chancellor. And the spells you said will go off? Any second now, Arch-Chancellor. So, whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen to us? Yes, Arch-Chancellor. Ridcully patted Wendell on the head. Sorry about this, he said. Wendell turned awkwardly to look down the passageway. There was something behind the Queen. It looked like a perfectly ordinary bedroom door, advancing in a series of small steps, as though someone was carefully pushing it along in front of them. What is it? Said Red. Wendell raised himself as far as he could. Schleppel! Now, come on, said Reg. It's Schleppel! shouted Wendell. Schleppel, it's us! Can you help us out? The door paused. Then it was flung aside. Schleppel unfolded himself to his full height. Hello, Mr. Poons. Hello, Reg, he said. They stared at the hairy shape that nearly filled the passageway. Schleppel, could you clear the way for us? Wendell quavered. No problem, Mr. Poons. Anything for a friend. A hand the size of a wheelbarrow glided through the steam and tore through the blockage, ripping it out with incredible ease. Hey, look at me, said Schleppel. You're right, a boogeyman needs a door like a fish needs a bicycle. Say it now and say it loud. And, now could you get out of the way, please? Sure. Wow! Schleppel took another swipe at the Queen. The trolley shot forward. And you'd better come with us, Wendell shouted as Schleppel disappeared in the mist. No, he shouldn't, said the Arch-Chancellor as they sped along. Believe me, what was that? Oh, he's a boogeyman, said Wendell. I thought you only get them in closets and things, shouted Ridcully. He's just come out of the closet, said Red Shoe proudly, and he's found himself. And just so long as we can lose him, we can't just leave him. We can, snapped Ridcully. There was a sound behind them like the eruption of swamp gas. Green light streamed past. The spells are starting to go off, shouted the Dean. Move it! The trolley whirred out the entrance and soared up into the cool of night, wheels screaming. Yo! Bellowed Ridcully as the crowd scattered ahead of them. Does that mean I can say it too? Said the Dean. All right, just once. Everyone can say it just once. Yo! Yo! Echoed Red Shoe. Ook! Yo! Said Wendell Poons. Yo! Said Schleppel. Somewhere in the darkness, where the crowd was thinnest, the gaunt shape of Mr. Ixolite, the world's last surviving banshee, sidled up to the shaking building and bashfully shoved a note under the door. It said, ooey, ooey, ooey. The trolley plowed to a very definitive stop. No one turned around. Reg said slowly, You're behind us, right? That's right, Mr. Shoe, said Schleppel happily. Should we worry when he's in front of us? Said Ridcully. Or is it worse because we know he's behind us? Ha! No more closets and cellars for this bogey, said Schleppel. That's a shame, because we got some really big cellars at the university, said Wendell Poons quickly. Schleppel was silent for a while. Then he said in an exploratory tone of voice, How big? Huge! Yeah, with rats? Rats aren't the half of it. There's escaped demons and all sorts of things down there. Infested they are. What are you doing? Hissed Ridcully. That's our cellars you're talking about. You'd prefer him under your bed, would you? Murmured Wendell, or walking around behind you? Ridcully nodded briskly. Well, yes, those rats are getting really out of hand down there, he said loudly. Some of them, about 2 feet long, wouldn't you say, Dean? 3 feet, said the Dean, at least. Fat as butter, too, said Wendell. Schleppel gave this some thought. Well, all right, he said reluctantly. Maybe I'll just wander in and have a look at them. The big store exploded and imploded at the same time, something it is almost impossible to achieve without a huge special effects budget or 3 spells all working against one another. There was the impression of a vast cloud expanding but at the same time moving away so rapidly that the overall effect was of a shrinking point. Walls buckled and were sucked in. Soil ripped up from the ravaged fields and spiraled into the vortex. There was a violent burst of non-music which died almost instantly, and then nothing except a muddy field. And floating down from the early morning skies like snow, thousands of white flakes. They slid silently through the air and landed lightly on the crowd. It's not seeding, is it? Said Red Shoe. Wendell grabbed one of the flakes. It was a crude rectangle, uneven and blotchy. It was just about possible, without certain amount of imagination, to make out the words, Closing down, sled, everything must og. No, said Wendell, probably not. He lay back and smiled. It was never too late to have a good life. And when no one was looking, the last surviving trolley on the Discworld rattled off sadly into the oblivion of the night, lost and alone. And as the footnote, it is generally thought, on those worlds where the mall life form has seeded, that people take the wire baskets away and leave them in strange and isolated places, so that squads of young men have to be employed to gather them together and wheel them back. This is exactly the opposite of the truth. In reality, the men are hunters stalking their rattling prey across the landscape, trapping them, breaking their spirit, taming them, and herding them to a life of slavery. Possibly. Alright, and that's where we're going to end up for now, because the next reading is definitely going to be the last. Oh boy! Thank you, everybody, for taking this journey with me through Reaper Man. A very good book. But yeah, next reading will be the last. I hope you've been enjoying it so far.